Debbie, thank you so much for joining me and us on this Emerging Payments Association Project Inclusion report around values and lifestyle-based banking. Really thrilled to have you with us from Lucy Neobank. It would be really great to begin by getting a sense of your story and how you came to create Lucy.
Yes, well, it's a long story, so I'll keep it as short as I possibly can. But I originally started out in technology in the UK, and back in 2000, everything changed when I unexpectedly got made redundant and decided to take a very, very late gap year and ended up in Cambodia. And the things I got involved with there involved sort of advising on ERP systems, which evolved into advising on core banking systems for microfinance institutions. And that really went on into advising microfinance institutions and other inclusive financial institutions on technology strategy. To cut a long story short, I was supposed to go back after a year and never did. And so I've been in Asia ever since then. I spent 6 years living in Cambodia, 2 in Laos, 2 in Indonesia, 2 in Bangladesh, and worked in about 35 countries across Africa and Asia. That was largely, although not exclusively, focused on emerging economies. One thing that I kind of saw a pattern on was wherever I went and whoever I worked with, the management of the financial institutions were overwhelmingly male. But when I went out beyond the confines of my hotel of an evening or weekend, saw that there were lots and lots of women who were working extremely hard on running small businesses, whatever they happened to be. And it seemed that there was this kind of disconnect that the women were running all the businesses, but they actually weren't getting access to the financial services a lot. And more than that, but there seemed to be a degree of almost complacency amongst a lot of the more mainstream financial institutions, shall we say, of actually really understanding who their customers were or recognizing that there were customers that weren't being served. And so it kind of tended to be a lot of like, well, this is what we do. It's a one size fits all, take it or leave it. And people by and large took it, even though it didn't really meet their needs. And kind of the further I went was also seeing that what the knock-on impacts of this were. So, I mean, for example, I was in Kyrgyzstan not so long ago and found out that a number of small business owners there, because their cash flows are lumpy and not regular, couldn't always meet their bank loan repayments. But they were so worried about being blacklisted by the bank that they were actually borrowing from illegal loan sharks to pay the bank, which kind of completely defeated the object. Right. And so there was a kind of dual stream thing, one of which was seeing that the real needs of micro businesses wasn't being recognized. But secondly, that women weren't really being recognized or understood. And, you know, around the same kind of time, we were seeing more information coming out in research about women are much lower credit risk in general than men, that women-owned businesses, given the same opportunities, tend to be 2.5 times more successful and profitable than average, and that women who have their own businesses put much more of their profit back into health, education, and the community. And so it was kind of around maybe 7 years ago that I started having sort of few more conversations and got introduced to a few people. And one of them, about 4 years ago, I guess, was Luke, who became my co-founder. He'd built up a digital app development company, and they'd become really big and successful over 15 years, I guess, to the point where he had 300 employees across 8 countries. And they did things like building the app for Emirates Airlines and big companies, The Economist and people like that. But he'd done a number for the banks and had been quite frustrated by just how rigid they were. And had kind of seen that, I think, as you all do, that like building a front-end digital platform is not the kind of solution, because that's the channel, right? So it is one part of the solution, but it's what happens at the back end, the products and the approach to dealing with customers that's equally as important. Just putting a nice app on the front of something doesn't make it a better solution, right? So and so we ended up getting together. We were introduced because we were in the same office complex. Someone introduced us. We had coffee. We gelled because we had such similar viewpoints on a lot of things, which seemed to be quite different from other people's viewpoints. And then somebody else he knew got introduced as well, who was Hal, my other co-founder, he'd been an ex-CEO of a bank in Myanmar. And had also seen firsthand that the women who borrowed from him were generally much better payers, but by and large they weren't the ones coming in to borrow because they weren't the ones that owned the only collateral the family had, which was the land. And therefore, if they wanted to borrow, they needed to come in with their husbands and get the husband's permission. And so it kind of, all these things were sort of, it all kind of came together, and we spent a bit of time dipping in and out of talking about it, and then finally said, you know, nobody's doing anything about this, so why don't we just do something? And that's kind of really how it came about.
Thanks, Debbie. And what's remarkable is actually the sheer breadth of jurisdictions and areas that you personally have covered by spending time on the ground. And I'd love to get a sense from you of is there a consistency of challenge that you find, especially by women, in terms of being underserved in the banking sector or financial services across those different jurisdictions?
Yes, and I mean, I think one of the things that I've seen and heard actually firsthand from banks is that a lot of bank management will give women lower limits on loans than men doing kind of the same thing. Somebody actually did say to me, oh yeah, but you know, we'd rather give the money to a man because a man running a business is more risk-taking. Like that's a good thing, right? And therefore we'll lend him more money than a woman who they saw as being more risk averse. And so that's a kind of common thing. But I think also one thing that's quite consistent and not just across countries and communities, but across socio-economic levels as well, is that women are often lacking in confidence or bolshiness maybe to actually just go and ask for it, right? Ask for what they want. And I think a lot of that has been driven by what I kind of referred to in the past as this dripping tap, right? Which is this kind of thing that kicked in around the age of 13, which is sort of telling women that they haven't really got what it takes to be a business person, right? And it kind of gets reinforced in pretty much everything in one shape or form. You know, particularly glass ceilings, if you're in corporate life, we've all been there. We've all had people say things to us, intentionally or otherwise, subconsciously or otherwise, but it has this kind of compounding effect that if any woman has the idea that she wants to quit her day job and start her own business, there's this little thing that's always whispering, right, and saying, oh, yeah, you haven't got what it takes, right? And that, say, is really universal. It's not just a developing countries thing. It's not just a low income thing. It's across the board. And so I think it's a combination of these things. And that's kind of what we decided to do, was actually address both of these things, really. One of which was valuing competence above confidence. And the other one was making sure that whatever we did actually really solved problems for people and address the pain points rather than trying to be one-size-fits-all solution.
Absolutely. And I think you referred to this earlier, and I'd love to get a sense of the conversation that you had with your co-founders. And it's something I think any neobank or new digital offer thinks about, especially when you're trying to deal with a problem which in this instance is not niche, not by any means. I mean, more than 50% of the world. How did you balance the idea of lobbying and influencing the existing financial system versus creating your own?
Well, I think it was partly, say, because of what I'd done in the past. And I mean, just to give one example, I was asked by the World Savings and Banking Institute to do a workshop on value proposition design for financial services, probably 2018, maybe, in Dhaka in Bangladesh. And so I had a whole bunch of their banks and we sat there with lots of diagrams and nice colored post-it notes, feeling very creative. And one of the banks there actually said to me, and I quote, "But this customer-centric things like lots of work, do we really have to do this?" And it was literally that, right? And it kind of summed up everything, that they just didn't really want to do it. They didn't really see the point in doing it. And I'd seen this in so many places. I spoke at lots of conferences, probably 5 or 6 a year, and everywhere from like Nicaragua to Kyrgyzstan, I guess. And again, a lot of what we talked about was the need for financial institutions to adapt, to digitize, to be more agile in order to respond to the emerging kind of fintech market. But it was kind of like it was either fear or complacency, or maybe a bit of both. And it was kind of obvious to me that people weren't going to change, right? That the banks weren't going to change. They kind of believed that they were in this position. And whenever they did try and change, it was superficial. And that's what I'm saying. They built some nice app to sit on top of their existing banking products. But the problem was not that. The problem was the products, right? But to get the products right means they actually need to really go out and talk to people and understand about their lives and what their problems are and this kind of thing. And that was the bit they really didn't want to do. And so, yeah, I'd kind of seen this already. And that was kind of, say, what drove Lucy and the formation of Lucy, is we'd all really recognized that trying to change the system was not something that we as sort of 3 individuals can do. So let's just create a new system.
I love that. And it's a really good segue into the next question I have, which is, how are you as Lucy developing and curating your products and services to suit the needs of your customer base?
Yeah, well, obviously the first point starts with listening, and listening with no preconceived solutions in mind. And that's the whole approach of value proposition design. You start with the customer, not with the product. It's really difficult actually for a lot of people to do, because human nature is to kind of leap to the solution, and then you try and retrofit the problem to fit the solution. And you see that all the time. And so that's been the approach that we've taken, is actually really to understand more about what people's lives are like, and how they may be similar or how they may be different. And so women entrepreneurs is not a segment. There are probably 50 segments within the group of women entrepreneurs, depending upon country, but also all sorts of other things too. And so that's the approach that we've taken, is really to kind of look at different groups who are quite distinct and, you know, say, well, this group has got a lot of similarities. What kind of problems are they facing? And from there to come up with products that actually meet those pain points. So what we've ended up with is a whole bunch of things, some of which are sort of similar, I guess, in a way to what other people are doing, and some which are quite different.
Fantastic. And I love your idea of listening. I mean, as you know, the work I've done up until joining the financial services industry is exactly that, which is a lived experience, knowledge equity based approach to creating product that serves the needs of communities, especially those who are otherwise unheard or excluded. And I think that speaks to the next question I have, Debbie, which is around, what do you think about this concept, right? This concept of lifestyle, values-based banking?
Well, I think it's essential. I mean, and you know, because even if we look at these sort of small subsegments, right, that people don't actually stay in that subsegment. They evolve and they grow and their life changes. And this is one of the things that really interests me as well, is like, how can you continually even adapt your services to one customer based upon the evolution that they're going through in their life, right? So if we take a micro business, you know, if she's running something from home and it's just her, right? And, you know, then she hires somebody else, there's been a change now, right? And then she moves out of the house and has a little shop. There's a change, right? The needs are actually evolving. And so again, it's not just a point of listening to that customer here, but here and here, and understanding now what's likely to be changing in what her actual needs are. And so, you know, we kind of see this as being really essential to be a sort of partner for growth on their growth trajectory. One of the key challenges, of course, is as a digital platform, how do you recognize all of that? Because you're not going out and having these conversations. But that's where machine learning and the beauty of data analytics comes in if you do it well. And so that's kind of one thing I've kind of got really at the forefront of my mind as we're planning the next steps for Lucy, is what data do we need to capture in a way that it's sort of invisible and unobtrusive, I think, to the customer, that they don't feel that they're being pumped for too much. And how can we then analyze that and interpret that data to help us to recognize where each of our customers is and how we could possibly adapt what we're doing to support them in that journey.
Brilliant. And I asked this next question, both as you, as Debbie, with your vast experience working across, you know, many different propositions in different countries, but also now, you know, as one of the co-founders of Lucy, which is, how do you see the next frontier of financial services developing and evolving because of propositions like yours and others, including, you know, the ones that I'm working with at Algebra?
Well, I think I can say how I'd like to see it evolving. I don't know if it's going to do it quite as much as we would hope for, right? And I think, you know, one thing that I did see is, like, very early on was Triodos Bank, I think, which is a great example of a financial institution that actually had some kind of principles and stood for something. And I think, you know, it's historically been, nobody likes their bank, do they?
Yeah.
Right. Nobody actually feels that their bank is on their side. If you've got to go in and see the bank manager, and no one ever feels that they can tell everything about what's going on and get decent advice, it's always, you're kind of trying to sell yourself to the bank manager, or you're worried that the bank manager is going to patronize you, or whatever it happens to be, right? I don't think anyone really likes their bank very much, let alone feels that their bank is there to kind of help them in some kind of way. And I think, you know, this is what we certainly would like to see change, is, and what we've done with Lucy as well, and actually why Lucy is called Lucy, is to kind of make it feel more personal, and more like it's your financial services partner, right? Because at the end of the day, you know, you're doing your bank a favor most of the time by putting your money there, but they don't make you feel like that. Yeah. Yeah. So, and you kind of, yeah. So I think, you know, what we're really trying to do is to treat our customers a bit more like customers, but also recognize them as people, and to understand what their challenges are, which is the key part, and what their aspirations are as well. And that's the way I would hope that things would start to go, with all the access to data and clever technology and stuff that's available now. You'd kind of think that we should be able to do this. One of the interesting examples that I saw, I'm forgetting who was doing it, was one of the neobanks in the UK, I think, they'd linked up with Fitbit. Have you seen this?
Oh, it sounds familiar. No, which, yeah, I have. Yeah,
N26 or one of those. Anyway,
yeah.
but they kind of linked up with Fitbit. So the more like steps you did during a day, you got more savings interest or something along those lines, which I thought was really rather cool. And again, it's kind of one of these things is kind of making finance a bit more part of your life, but kind of encouraging good behavior and things as well, which I think is a nice touch. It makes it a bit more personal again.
I completely agree. And you know, and beyond services and products, how are you? And obviously, it's a huge values-driven, purpose-driven proposition, Lucy. How are you integrating those values and principles across the business, including, you know, the back office stuff?
Well, we're little at the moment because we've only just started, but I mean, I've just hired a first Singapore head of tech who's female. And you know, we are trying to identify as many women in tech as possible to form part of our tech team. That's certainly, it's actually been quite challenging, I have to say, in general. But I mean, our aim, of course, you know, we're not in any sense anti-men, let's put it that way, right? So we do, obviously my two co-founders are male, and I've just hired someone as a tech PM who's a guy as well. So from that point of view, it's just more about wanting to have a team in place who actually are on board with what we're trying to achieve. And what I've found is, actually, it is kind of quite universal. It's not just only women that get this, right? A lot of people understand what the issues are, have seen what the issues are, and understand what we're doing and believe in what we're doing. And so that's kind of been more of my focus, is kind of making sure that we're bringing in people, that it's not just a day job as such. It's something that they actually can feel connected to what we're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. And Debbie, one just as an opportunity, because I think we've started, you definitely shared with some of the challenges that women have in particular across jurisdictions globally, and maybe some more pertinent in some areas and countries than others. Are there any other challenges that you want to highlight to our audience in terms of obstacles and friction with the current financial system and the way transactions are done with the system?
There's kind of lots of different ones. I mean, some of the ones that have come out to me have been quite, like, maybe Singapore specific, I don't know, but I mean, just to give you an example, I have a personal account and a Lucy business account with the same bank, and I need two different apps, one for each of the accounts. I mean, it seems so basic, right? If I've got a personal account and a business account and they're both mine, then why shouldn't I be able to access them from the same app? I don't know. It seems unnecessary friction is what I'm saying. And it's kind of part of that experience. And it seems that banks often try to make their apps even seem difficult to get around. So, I mean, that's just one aspect. I mean, say that the other thing, of course, is what we're doing outside of the financial services thing, which is recognizing the whole more holistic suite of challenges that women entrepreneurs have, and building in some non-financial tools and services as well into the app. So, because we really want to kind of make it feel like we're a partner that's actually helping them to grow.
Brilliant. And my final question is, it would be lovely to get a sense and a picture of how you go out of your way to listen to your audience and to your customers that I know is shaping your business every single day. What does that look like?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I a number of things. I mean, I've got lots of friends who've got their own businesses, but in addition to that, I did a survey through a friend not so long ago on Facebook and offered them some free coaching on value proposition design, because it's something that I kind of have got a lot of experience in. So the deal was basically anyone that answered the survey could have this coaching session, and because they were all small business owners, they were all very keen. So I took quite a bit of time doing some of these, but because I was kind of doing this coaching and it was valuable to them, they kind of really opened up about stuff. So it was kind of quite helpful to see what were very, very different businesses and what their different problems were, but also what the similar things were. And this was everybody from, say, like ESG consultants to website designers to artists, right? People that made birthday cakes. Kind of, you started to see there were these commonalities of problems. What's also been kind of interesting is that I really wanted to understand some more about foreign domestic workers, because that's the other segment that we're working with in Singapore. And of course, they are used to being the invisible maid in the background that's not supposed to speak unless spoken to a large degree. But I was quite fortunate in that a number of my friends have got helpers that they've got a good relationship with. And they actually gave them permission to sit in their living room with a cup of tea and speak openly about things. And so the key thing there was having that trust, which I was fortunate because it was my friend's helper, and the friends wanted sort of had their own, the helper's well-being at heart as well. So that encouraged that openness. And I think, you know, this is, again, I've seen in many places actually a difficult aspect if you're trying to do qualitative research, is getting the trust in order to get the openness. But I also am a very firm believer in qualitative over quantitative. Again, having done lots of research in Bangladesh and Nepal and Congo and all kinds of places, that you know, like, if you just ask a whole series of closed questions, you often just don't get the real picture, because first of all, people just make stuff up. And secondly, you know, what you ask them at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, they won't give you the same answer as they'll give you on 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And so it can be very, very misleading. And I tend to not use that. But say that getting the deep answers and having the conversations, you really do need to build up a mutually trusting and respectful relationship. And so that's something I've taken a lot of time to do, is to kind of get to a stage where people feel that they can be open and they can share what their real challenges are without feeling that they're going to be judged or worse, sold to, right? And that's the whole point as well, is like, you're doing research, it's not a marketing exercise. You're not there to try and convince them that what you're going to do is going to be great. You're there to actually listen and sort of digest what you're being told. And that's the approach that I've always taken.
Amazing, really good approach. And for those who are listening, I hope they're doing something similar. Debbie, it was really great to hear the story of Lucy Neobank and your own story.
Thank you.
And I guess the next question before I go is, where, so that our audience knows, where are you launching? What's the plan? When can we see it in the UK? I think where most of our primary audience members will be.
Yeah. So, well, we're launching roughly the end of this month. We're already in a private closed beta. And so that's in Singapore. And the aim is, come Q3, I guess, we're going to be starting to look at other countries in Southeast Asia. So our focus at the moment is kind of probably Philippines, Indonesia, because it's where a lot of the helpers come from, but Hong Kong, Dubai, of course, very similar profiles to Singapore. But the beauty of what we've developed, and, you know, we've taken a year so far to actually build our tech platform, is that we've developed it in a way that we can easily partner with different financial institutions at the back end on a country by country or even product by product basis. So this enables us then to sort of identify a market which we think can benefit from Lucy, and then to forge partnerships with banks at the back end, and to plug into them very easily. And so, you know, that would then enable us really to roll out in different countries pretty quickly. And I think we don't have any particular fixed strategy. As I say, what I've been seeing is that the more people I speak to from places I've worked, everyone's saying, bring Lucy, because we really need it here. And you know, I've kind of recognized, of course, being British, that the UK has, of course, got a very big segment of women home-based micro entrepreneurs. I would expect possibly more now than ever before. And to say that the support and the pain points is really very universal. And so I think coming to the UK is absolutely, definitely an option.
Brilliant. Well, Debbie, thank you so much for taking part in this EPA Project Inclusion Values and Lifestyle Banking report. We look forward to seeing how you fare and wish you the best of luck.